Bible, if you would, and you can turn with me, please. We're turning to 1 Peter chapter number 1. 1 Peter chapter number 1. So obviously, you've heard me say now a number of times, and this will be the last time, that we've been studying a little bit about what the Bible says about suffering. You know, for most people, it's not that the Christian life is mostly suffering. It's not. There are people it is, particularly people in other places in the world. There's a lot of suffering. They don't have access to some of the things that we have, and et cetera, et cetera. And, you know, we're living in a very dangerous and difficult world, and lots of confusion and lots of troubles in that. And, of course, we look at any given time as the worst time. You know, this is the worst of times, we tend to think. I don't know if that's true or not, but we tend to look at it that way. And I hear some of these things, and almost sort of like the idea of encouraging Christians to pretend that we don't suffer, when the fact is we know that we do. Or maybe it's not us, it's somebody around us. And so it just seemed that it would be helpful. It's been helpful for me to study it, the subject of the Bible on suffering, and I trust it's helpful to you. I'm sure I'm not scratching the surface, because I don't know what's below the surface, really, and it would take a lot more than 4 sermons. But, and you know, everybody likes to be encouraged. I do. It's not all bad. It's not bad, all bad, only bad. It's bad. Pull the blanket over your head and wait for the end. It's not like that. But if we're not told that life has its share of difficulties, if we're not told life has its share of sufferings, then we're going to be taken by surprise. So the question here is, if we're going to suffer, and we are. Wanda was sharing with Nancy and I a true story of a lady, David's mother-in-law. So don't let me confuse you, Wanda's brother-in-law's mother-in-law went to Hawaii. When did she go? A few days? Right, maybe a week ago, in her 80s. Yeah. And she had served in Hawaii as a missionary and wanted to go back. And long story, getting there and who would be able to go with her. She wouldn't be able to do it alone. She was there 2 days, and a few days. And then after a few days, Penny, Wanda's sister-in-law, went in to wake her in the morning or whatever, and she'd gone to be with the Lord in the night. And I didn't say this, but Wanda said it. So then I confirmed. She said, you never know, maybe she wanted to go to be with the Lord from Hawaii. She'd served him there for so many years. So I said, yeah, maybe she opened her eyes and said, Lord, I'd love to go to be with you right from here. This was home for so long. I'm ready. And she closed her eyes somewhere in the night and went to be with the Lord. So this is what we say, great way to go. Amen. Just to close your eyes on earth, open your eyes in heaven. There you are. And some do go to be with the Lord that way. Some of us might find ourselves suffer our way in to some degree. So the question is about suffering, is this the issue? Is it so we can suffer and say, I got that over with? And that's sort of like fatalism. I heard an illustration of fatalism one time. The guy said fatalism, a person who's a fatalist trips and falls down the stairs and gets to the bottom and said, thank God I got that over with. Because they just see all these bad things, and they just got to have them happen. So the question is there any benefit to us if we suffer? Maybe I shouldn't say when, but probably it is when. And suffering is in degrees. So one person's trouble maybe doesn't compare to another person's trouble from Earth's point of view. So maybe we would say, mine doesn't raise to the level of suffering. Well, it can be the troubles and the trials that we face. So the question is there any benefit for us? Like when God allows trouble in our life, because He does, is there any benefit to us? So this morning we noted that one of the benefits that can come, it's not guaranteed, we have to be cooperating with Him, is it can help us to grow in our spiritual maturity. And you remember, I used the illustration of learning to tie your shoes. I don't remember learning to tie my shoes. I don't remember anything about it, but I have good news. I can tie my shoes. So I cooperated with whoever taught me, Now I don't even think about it. And so as we're looking at life, we go through difficulties and trouble. Some of them, we don't even really remember them or remember something about them. But if we can learn the maturity that goes with them. In fact, today I'm obsessed with tying my shoes. I hate to tell you this, but you probably have never noticed this. But I tighten my shoes every time before I get up to preach. Like I sat down there tonight and tightened my shoes. It's like a habit. So I learned it for sure, but I don't remember what the circumstances were. Here's benefit number 2. Suffering tests and can strengthen our faith. So in 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 6, it says, "Wherein ye greatly rejoice, though now for a season, if need be, ye are in heaviness through manifold temptations, that the trial of your faith, being much more precious than of gold that perisheth, though it be tried with fire, might be found unto praise and honor and glory at the appearing of Jesus Christ." Would you notice that word, heaviness? It says, ye are in heaviness through manifold temptations. Peter doesn't ignore it. He's talking to people. And by the way, if you read 1 Peter, because there's a lot in here about suffering, and 2 Peter, the people he was writing to, they were suffering. This is the book. We're in chapter 4. You don't need to turn to it. Verse 12, it says, "Brethren," it says, "Beloved, think it not strange concerning the fiery trial which is to try you, as though some strange thing happened unto you." Well, Peter doesn't ignore it. He doesn't play it down. He doesn't overlook it. He says right out, verse number 6, "Wherein ye are in heaviness." And that word heaviness means sorrow. It means grief. You know, sometimes there's a child, they're bounding their way across the lawn, the floor, whatever. They seem to lift off into the air. They tumble through the air 3 or 4 times. They hit this, hit that, fall over that, collapse against the wall, burst into tears. And someone comes along and picks them up and says, what? What do they say? "Are you all right?" Well, if that child could just put that on pause, they look up and say, "Do I look all right? Like I went through all that over and blah, 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 and there I'm banged against the wall here." Or maybe someone scoops them up and they're crying and they look at them and say, "Listen, it doesn't hurt that bad." Well, respectfully, how do you know how bad it hurts? Just think if you're that child and it hurts really, really bad to you, and you look up at your mom or your dad and they say, "Now, it doesn't hurt that bad, does it?" And you know, as we go through life and we're looking at Christians and we're watching them in their struggle, be careful, this is a strong word, be careful about the audacity of saying to a suffering Christian, "Well, it's really not that bad." Well, maybe it is. Maybe it's worse than what we perceive it to be. And then you see that word manifold. We probably haven't used that word for a while. It's the word that goes back to James. "Count it all joy when you fall into various trials." Here the word is translated with the word manifold. Now, look, we haven't used the word manifold. We don't use that word. But it's that same idea. It's like Joseph's coat of many colors. I guess the word is variegated, right? When something it doesn't have a predominant color. It has many colors. Every Christian experiences trouble. Every Christian experiences suffering. In the case of some people, there's so many, like these colors, it's just given the overall name here called manifold. And you've got the word temptation. Similar to James, this is not, so here's a theological definition of temptation. It's a solicitation to sin. That's not what this is. This word temptation means a testing. It means a trial. And we're not going to get into this, but remember, the Bible tells us that He only sends trials that He knows we can pass, tests we can pass. But that is a different subject. So, would you just look at verse 7? And let's just paraphrase this a little bit. You know what a paraphrase is? It's when you take a phrase, a verse of the Bible, and you just say it in your own words. Nothing to do with the original word or translation, any of that. So notice what it says. That the trial of your faith, being much more precious than of gold that perisheth, though it be tried with fire. In other words, it's a real trial. Might be found unto praise and honor and glory at the appearing of Jesus Christ. So, can you think of a paraphrase? Like I'm talking really simple here. What is verse saying? It's saying our faith can be tested, and we can say, we passed. I passed. Maybe when you were in school, you were one of those who, passing was, you knew you were going to pass. Some of us, just to use the word generally, might not have been in that group. For us, passing was a shock. I passed. I remember, as I said this morning, I taught our 5 kids to drive, and their various qualities of drivers, and always have been, just my personal opinion. All the names remain, protect the innocent and not expose the guilty. But there was one of them. I took them to take their driving test, and off they went. And I was kind of psyching myself up to, how am I going to console them when they don't pass? In fact, Nancy has a sister, same age as me. I'm 1 year older than Nancy. And Nancy's sister had been to driving school, and she'd been to she'd been to driver's ed in school, and she just couldn't drive. So I was the same age as her. This sounds kind of ridiculous today, but, there wasn't too much patience with her driving. So I said to her, well, listen, I said, if you get permission to use your mother's car, I could teach you to drive. Mind you, we're the same age. Don't ask me where I would have the audacity to think I could. But I did. I said, I could teach you to drive. So she asked her mother. Nancy's mother said, okay. And I think probably the only reason is they were just thoroughly exasperated that driving was not coming to her after being the driver's ed and driving school. She just couldn't drive. So off we went. I don't really remember the experience of helping her learn to drive. Here we were, Bath, Maine, at the driver examination place, and off she went to have her driving test. And I really don't remember praying, but I thought, what am I going to say when she doesn't pass? I was sure she wouldn't pass. Pretty soon in she came, marched through the door like the Queen of England. I passed! Just like that. Like, her. I knew I'd pass. I had no doubt I'd pass. Of course I passed. I don't know why and she wasn't being arrogant. She was happy that she passed. Well, verse number 7 means when our faith is tried, we can pass the faith test. We can say, I passed. Not to our glory, not to our praise, not to pat ourselves on the back, but because tests of our faith are not designed by God to crush us. Did you hear that? Tests of our faith are not designed to crush us. Do you remember last week I said in either morning or evening, I said, before you give a person a resource who's suffering, because sometimes somebody is suffering, they've had a great tragedy or whatever, we rush off to the Christian bookstore. I don't even know if there are Christian bookstores anymore. We go on Amazon and we look for Christian book on suffering. We look for one that has a high review. We buy it and we hand it to them. We say, this might help you. What did I say about that last week? Read it first. And that comes from experience. So we had a young woman in one of our churches, terrible tragedy. Her 4-year-old son died unexpectedly. It was terrible tragedy. And it was very difficult for her, very difficult for her husband. And so on a regular basis, I went and visited with them and visited her. And one day she said, Pastor, I want to show you something. She said, someone gave me this book. And she said, and I highlighted something in the book. Could you read it to me, please? So I picked up the book, and this is what it said. It said, God never uses anyone significantly until he has first crushed them. I read that, looked at her. She said, I don't want to be used by God. She said, I didn't know God was in the crushing business. So before you hand it out, make sure you know what it says. Don't assume that you can defend everything in there. God doesn't send tests of our faith to crush us. He sends tests of our faith so that our faith will grow. So what is faith? This is the definition I use. I use the definition that faith is trusting God to do for you or through you that which you cannot do for yourself. And we should do everything by faith, but that doesn't mean it takes faith to do it. You probably didn't drive here tonight by faith. Now, maybe you did. Maybe you rode by faith. Well, anyway. And I only mean we've done it before, you're practiced, you know the route. It's like one of those things you can do it with your eyes closed. And it's like when you're driving down the road and all of a sudden you think, where am I? And you look in your mirror and you look back and think, did I come by all that back there? It's because we've done it before. Well, every now and then, suffering comes into our life. Let me say it a different way. Suffering comes into our life, and God sees that as an opportunity to allow our faith to grow. And so He allows this suffering, this trouble, this problem we have to cause us to trust Him to do for us or through us that which we cannot do for ourselves. I think it might be safe to say that's not something we're looking for. God, please give me an opportunity. God, help me find myself in the middle of something I cannot do for myself. We're probably not going to pray that. Those things come upon us. Here we are. God, I've never done this. I don't think I can get through this. Can you help me? This suffering, this trouble, this tragedy. And, these 5, I have 5 of them. I don't think I'll get to all 5. I wouldn't carry them like on a 3x5 card and start reading them to a person who's suffering. Like, it doesn't work that way. We have to come to see God's purpose. In the midst of those opportunities for our faith to grow, we may be right on the edge of our seat, but we know, God, I can't do this. The only way I can do this is you do it for me or through me. And then we pass. We pass the test of faith. What that means is we did trust God to do for us or through us what we could not do for ourselves. And a faith that grows in the result of suffering, a faith that gets stronger as a result of suffering, it's not time for back patting. Boy, I did that. Boy, I was good at that. It's the opportunity to stop and glorify God. So when we suffer and we trust God to help us, and He does. Now let me say to you, those few words don't do that phrase justice, do they? Listen to it again. When we suffer and we trust God to help us, and He does. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 words. Those 12 words, so easy to say, but they can represent a very, very deep and difficult time. And there's nothing wrong with being honest. When you look up to God, He's not going to look down and say, what are you crying for? That didn't hurt. How you doing? How do you feel? I think we say, you okay, because it's just a reaction. But it always comes on for someone who doesn't feel good. That's why we ask the question. So, when we suffer and trust God to help us, and He does, it's our opportunity to glorify Him. And again, that little phrase, it is our opportunity to glorify Him. More words that do not do that situation justice. This time, just 7 words. It is our opportunity to glorify Him. We can say that in Shazam, it's gone, but that actual outworking of that experience in our life, physically, mentally, emotionally, financially, whatever it is, can be a very, very difficult time. But it's probably not going to happen apart from an understanding that suffering should cause our faith to grow. Should cause us to stop and say, God, I can't do this. I don't want to do this. I didn't choose this, but You've allowed this. Excuse me. And so, would you allow my faith to grow? It's a great thing to know that nothing ever takes him by surprise. Anything ever take you by surprise? Does me. Nothing ever takes God by surprise. Nothing ever sneaks up on him. For some reason, when we lived up north, we had periodic experiences with bats. They tell me there are bats here, but I've never had a bat inside my house here. But we did in one of the churches I pastored in Maine. All of a sudden, there'd be a bat flying around. Then when Nancy and I were in Maine last summer for those times helping out, all of a sudden one night there was a bat flying around the house. Then on our last trip, Nancy and I were sitting in the place we were staying, we were in a living room, and there was one of these kind of an old-fashioned stereo, with a turntable and a tuner and big speakers. And Nancy said, "Chris, that looks like a bat that's hanging on the front of that speaker." And it was. It was. I don't mind bats at all, as long as I see them first. If they see me before I see them, it may not be a good experience. You follow what I'm saying? There's nothing going to come into my life. Let's say this seriously. There's nothing coming into my life or your life that God is going to stop, and I'm not being irreverent or demeaning, but just think it through, that God's going to all of a sudden say, "Whoa, I never saw that coming." And so when we find ourselves in difficulties, we can say, "God, this can be used for me to become spiritually mature. God, this can be used to cause my faith to grow." And my faith needs to grow. All right, here's number 3. Number 3, suffering can promote obedience. Turn to chapter 4. I mentioned chapter 4. Turn to chapter 4, right here in 1 Peter. This is really interesting, these verses. 1 Peter chapter 4, verse number 1. Excuse me. It says, "For as much then as Christ hath suffered for us in the flesh." Just think about that. "Arm yourselves likewise with the same mind." What mind? Christ's mind. How was he thinking when he suffered in the flesh? "For he that hath suffered in the flesh hath ceased from sin, that he no longer should live the rest of his time to the flesh, to the lust of men, but to the will of God." Now, Jesus never sinned. We know that. There was a debate, a number of years ago about whether Jesus could sin, all prompted by a little booklet by M.R. DeHaan about whether Jesus could sin. And so that we debate these things. They come up and we debate them. I don't believe Jesus could sin. This is not teaching about Jesus sin. He's transitioning from Jesus in his mind and suffering to you and I. Because when we suffer, we often look for relief. We suffer, we look for relief. How can we create some relief from this suffering? There are some hymns people just love. "When we walk with the Lord in the light of his word, what a glory he sheds on our way. While we do his good will, he abides with us still, and with all who will trust and obey." When we're looking for relief from suffering, are we inclined towards obedience, or are we inclined towards rebellion? Do you follow? Sometimes we talk about people who self-medicate. And, some people self-medicate with liquor. Some people self-medicate, with shopping. The pressure's on. They want to relieve the pressure. So they go spend money they don't have. Now, you and I might say, well, that's the most ridiculous thing I could ever think of. Well, the person, this isn't, it. If we self-medicate, it's not because we thought through it logically, it's because we want some relief. Something's not right, in this case, suffering, a challenge, a trial. We want relief from that, and we default to doing something that we think will bring relief. And by the way, it always does. The problem is, it doesn't last very long. Sometimes we self-medicate with food, right? Sometimes we self-medicate with anger. Sometimes we actually self-medicate with medicine. Terrible, terrible crisis, this opioid addiction business. Terrible. You know, have you noticed, by the way, these pain clinics, there are far fewer of them now than there was once upon a time? It's because they cracked down on that. There are people who have chronic pain, they need help for their chronic pain. But they sort of became a thing. And they have these, powerful drugs, OxyContin and all this. And so you remember a few years ago I had some trouble with my back, so we had to go to the walk-in clinic because it was Friday, and doctors don't work Friday. And I went to the walk-in clinic, and the doctor said, yeah, you got a whatever in your back. He said, so I'm going to give you a steroid, to get that swelling in your spine, whatever, and I'm going to give you some pain pills, OxyContin or one of them. And, there's only a few pills because, after all, this is... And so we went home, and I looked at the bottle. How many of these pills do I need, I thought. So I read it. It said, take 1 or 2 as needed. Well, I hadn't had any. So in my genius brain, I thought I must need 2. I haven't had any. You need 1 or 2 as needed. I haven't had any. I must need 2. I took 2 of those pills. It was about 15 minutes later. I didn't know who I was, where I was. Well, I did, but I didn't care. Like, if the kids had walked in, we were still living out in the woods out there. If the kids walked in and said, Dad, just want you to know the roof blew off, just blew off the house, I would have said, okay, no problem. We'll worry about it later. In fact, I was at a PTSD seminar, met a pastor from New Hampshire. Do you know that New Hampshire is one of the places has the highest per capita of opioid addiction? Yeah. Who would know? I was sitting around a table with some pastors at a mealtime, talking to this pastor, and I said, so Pastor, where are you from? He told me this town in New Hampshire where he pastored. This goes back just a few years. And I said, yeah, I never heard of that. He said, well, the only thing we're famous for, he said, our little town has the highest per capita percentage of opioid addiction in the country. I said, Pastor, how can this be true? And if you know anything about this, you've read anything about this, we're not talking your typical drug addict. We're talking young professionals. We're talking young mothers. We're talking young grandmothers. We're talking high school football players. So I said, Pastor, what do you attribute this to? You live there. I think his was the only church in this whole town. I said, what do you attribute it to? Guess what he said. Don't call out. Guess what he said. He said he never hesitated. He said, it's one thing. I said, what's that? He said, boredom. He said, they don't work. They can't get a job. They can't work. They're sitting home. You imagine. It's a terrible, terrible, terrible thing, opioid addiction. Well, I'm sure you're not sitting here addicted to opioids, but we could be addicted, can I use that word in a general sense, to looking for relief from suffering by whatever, instead of being prompted to trust and obey. Because most of us are going to react to suffering. We're going to react to trials. And how are we going to react? What's our reaction going to be? It says in verse 1, arm yourselves with the same mind. What was his mind? What was Jesus' mind in the face of suffering? Here was his mind. Nevertheless, not my will, but thine be done. Now, here we are. In case you don't know this, we're at 15744 County Road 474. The temperature is set at 76, and it's not raining. The sun is shining. you're going to be on your way home soon or on your way to do whatever you're going to do. There's nobody here thinking about self-medicating. And I'm not talking about self-medicating with pills. I'm talking about trouble comes, pressure comes, suffering comes. We want relief. I'm going to react. How am I going to react? How am I going to react? And it needs to prompt me to react in a way that is obedience. Suffering can promote obedience rather than reacting. Can I say it this way? Reacting in a way that makes the problem worse, because now I have two problems. Now I don't only have a challenge that has come into my life, I have the guilt of disobedience, what I'm calling my self-medicating. Today, 2021, terrible, terrible relief, pornography on the internet. It's everywhere. What news site do you get your news from? You know, a lot of Christians get their news from Fox News. I'm not saying you should or you shouldn't. I read the Fox News website, okay? Have you ever stopped to count the ads, pictures, articles on Fox News that have some inappropriate element to them? You ever notice that? Now, I said that when I was preaching right here probably 3 years ago. And, you know, this is not intended to be unkind. I got about the same reaction that I'm getting right now, like, I don't know what he's talking about. A few days later, a man you know, if I said his name, every person here would know what I'm talking, came to me and said, Pastor, I never thought of that. Next time I was reading Fox News, I went through and counted the articles and the pictures that are just right on the edge of inappropriate. He said, I can't believe it. You were right. Now, he wasn't saying, well, maybe he was saying, I'm surprised you were right. It's an epidemic. It's an epidemic because children have cell phones. It's an epidemic because children have cell phones and their parents say, my kids would never look at that. For some people, it's self-medicating. When trouble or difficulty comes, instead of being armed with the same mind. You know, to be a missionary with the Gospel Furthering Fellowship, that's our mission. You have to enroll in what is called Covenant Eyes. Covenant Eyes is a program that you put on your computer, and you choose a person to hold you accountable for what you look at on your computer. Your computer, your phone, not your television set, your internet-enabled devices. And every day, that person gets an email, and that person gets pictures of some of the things you looked at, and they're blurred. And if any of the pictures could be inappropriate, it says, we are concerned about this picture. And so if you were going to be a missionary with the Gospel Furthering Fellowship, and you said, well, I got news for you, I'm not doing that. Well, you wouldn't be a missionary with the Gospel Furthering Fellowship. It's required. You have to do it. Nancy has to do it. Because you can't require things of some and not everybody. And the reason is because pornography addiction among missionaries is at staggering proportions. Why? Is it because some missionary out there in the middle of nowhere wants to spend his or her time looking at inappropriate pictures and things? Of course not. It's because sometimes when the pressure of life comes on, we're looking for a pressure relief valve. And they do relieve pressure for a very short time. Follow what I'm saying? So it can promote obedience. Here's number 4. Suffering can be used for our character development. We only have 4 minutes, so let me just remind you of a Bible verse. Romans chapter 12, verse 2. It says, be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind. Do you know the moment you and I got saved, God goes to work changing us? What is He changing us into? Christ-likeness. Do you know if you and I are going to be Christ-like, there's things got to go. Right? There's things got to go. If we're going to be changed into Christ-likeness, there are new things that need to come. Right? And so suffering can be a reminder, a prompter, can be used to us to look at ourselves and say, maybe God wants to use this to have you develop in your Christian character. When Nancy and I were in Bible college, we had to read these little, they're just little booklets on different subjects, and they weren't connected. The teacher just over time accumulated these booklets that she thought would be very helpful to read. Like one of them was entitled, "Your Reactions Are Showing." And there was a line in there, I've never forgotten it. Now this goes back to 1978. It said, "Nothing can hurt us except our reactions." But that's not the book I want to tell you about. There was another one. It was called, listen closely, "Sandpaper and the Self-Life." Now just think about it. The title of the booklet was Sandpaper. What is sandpaper used to do? Well, it's to take something off, right? And the self-life. And the thesis of that little booklet was sometimes God allows things in our life to be the sandpaper that takes off the things that need to go from our life. Maybe there's character qualities we need to develop, like empathy. Maybe we need the character quality of empathy, learning to learning to feel when other people are suffering. Maybe it's the character quality of honesty. Maybe we're not an honest person. We don't tell the truth. The Bible says, lie not one to another. That means I need some sandpaper taken to my self-life so I can become the person He wants me to be. Trouble, suffering, difficulty can be used of God for me to focus on not just my difficulties, but my own character, because the difficulties are going to come and go, but it's me that has to withstand them. Maybe it's the matter of integrity. Maybe I'm just not a person of integrity. My word's not good. I can't be relied on. I can't be counted on. I can't be trusted. And God's trying to get my attention. I'm sitting in church, service after service, Sunday school, Sunday after Sunday, reading devotionals, week after day, taking in all this good stuff. However, I've come to tolerate a lack of integrity in myself. Like my word's just not good. So God allows some difficulty, suffering, trouble, and maybe it's so that I'll stop and take a look at myself. Maybe it's a lack of industry. Do you know what a lack of industry means? How might we refer to a person who has a lack of industry? We might say, they're lazy. Life's tough if you're lazy. And look, we all can be lazy, right? Well, maybe not all of us, but probably most of us. We could have by the way, resting on your day off is not being lazy. Enjoying relaxing is not being lazy. Being lazy is when you just lack industry. It's like if we sit and sort of just wait for life to happen. Like, when your mother says, clean your room. And so you sort of sit down there and look it over. You kind of wait for it to start cleaning itself. Or whatever. Could be one of many things. I just picked out a few character issues. Maybe, no doubt, when trouble comes into our life, maybe God's tried a lot of things to say to me, Chris, that's got to go. That's got to go. I'm trying to tell you, you've got to be transformed. That's got to go. Something else has got to come. But you're not listening to me. So I'm going to allow this difficulty in your life so that you can let me be transforming you so your character, you can becoming the person that I want you to be. Difficulty can promote character development. Here's the last one. Benefit number 5. Suffering is part of our spiritual heritage and reward. Do you know all the believers who came before us suffered? They had difficulties. It's part of our spiritual heritage. It goes with walking with the Lord. And it's also part of our reward. So I'm going to read you 2 verses. You don't need to turn to them because I'm going to read them as quickly as I can find them. The first is Romans 8, verse 18. Paul wrote, "For I reckon," he must have been a southerner, "for I reckon that the sufferings of this present time," he doesn't say they aren't suffering, he says, "I reckon that the sufferings of this present time, they are not worthy to be compared with the glory that shall be revealed." So think about suffering today, the glory that's coming is more in proportion wise. One more verse, and I'm just kind of skipping over his hit, just telling you what these are. 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse number 17. Now this is the Apostle Paul writing. You remember that place where he said, thrice was I stoned, day and night in the deep, attacked of my own countrymen. Remember all that list he gives of his suffering? And in chapter 4, verse 17, he says, "For our light affliction, which is but for a moment, worketh for us a far more exceeding and eternal weight of glory." Over all these years of ministry, I've had the responsibility to be with some people that you would not call their affliction light. You would not say it was for a moment. But compared to the glory that's coming, it is. Compared to the reward that is coming, it's part of our spiritual heritage. It goes with it. To be a Christian, to be a follower of Christ, to have a personal relationship with the Lord Jesus Christ. Trouble goes with it. But it's also part of our reward. So when we suffer, we have to, what's the word, exponentially think about the reward. Because it's far greater. Maybe, I didn't study this in detail, but maybe there's some meaning there of that suffering fading out of sight because the glory that's coming is so wonderful. You follow what I'm saying? You don't have to look very far to find somebody who's suffering, do you? Or having trouble, difficulty. They're not looking for quick answers. They're really looking for somebody who identifies, listens, empathizes. So years ago, when that, I think it was that boy who died, someone called me up on the phone and said, "Pastor, I really know that I should go to the funeral home. I really know that." I mean, this was a huge funeral because that's the way it is with children. They called me up and said, "I think it was that. Pastor, I really know I should go, but I have a problem." I said, "What's that?" And they said, "I don't know what to say to them. There'll be a line of people. There'll be that little casket and that little boy in that casket. And I'll be working my way in line. Pretty soon it'll be just me and them. It'll be my turn. And I don't know what to say. So I guess I'm not going to go. Because I don't know what I would say." So they were sort of saying to me, "You always know what to say. What should I say?" So I immediately said, "I don't always know what to say." But I said, "Let me tell you a little something. Probably they're not going to remember what you say unless it's hurtful. They probably won't remember it. They're just going to remember that you were there. And they may forget you were there, and then someday they're going to take out the, what do they call it, the guest registry book, and they're going to look through that guest registry book, and they're going to read the names, and they're going to say, 'Oh, yeah, I didn't remember they were there.'" It's not knowing the exact right thing to say. It's being there sometimes. Sometimes we don't know what to say. So, we moved and moved and moved. Then we moved to where we are, and I determined when we moved where we were, I was going to go through every box I'd ever packed. I carted them around for years, went through every box, and guess what I found? 2 things. I found every sympathy card we were sent when my dad went to be with the Lord. Because I had saved them. And I don't think that any of you were here then. You might have been shortly thereafter, single. Yeah. Then he disappeared and came back married. Well, that's a whole other story. And you know what I did? I took him out and read every one. And I saved him. I kept digging, and guess what I found? I found it's not called a guest book. It's like the condolences book from when my mother died in August of 1974. And I read through the list of names of people who signed it. Neighbors, people, school teachers, people that I don't even think I knew they cared. But I read it later, and it meant something to me. I packed it up, sent it to my sister, and said, Celeste, I want you to have this. I've had it for all these years. I want you to have it now. I think reading through it, might be something that you would find, helpful or whatever. So it's not about knowing the right thing to say. Usually it's just about being there. All right, we're going to sing one more song. There's far away in the depths of my spirit tonight rolls a melody sweeter than psalm. In celestial-like strains it unceasingly falls, or my soul like an infinite calm. Here's what it is. Peace, peace, wonderful peace, coming down from the Father above. Sweep over my spirit forever, I pray, in fathomless billows of love. Let's stand together. We're just going to sing verse 1 and the chorus. Number 500, wonderful peace. Just this verse and the chorus.